there may actually be some valuable WWE programming on TV. It may not be the wrestling, but biography on A&E has been pretty good so far this season, I think.
The documentaries are great, and we will preface this by saying same thing. I won't belabor it, but the production, the video, the way the shows are put together, because obviously WWE has a hand in this, and whoever the AEW side of the folks are, it's first-class stuff. Now, sometimes they rewrite history, as we've mentioned, but the look of the program and the work they put into it and the technical aspect is great. And also, as I mentioned earlier in the program, you get a chance to see when wrestling was over, shit looked halfway good, people were excited about it, and now we know why they're still bringing these guys back in their late 50s, because nobody can follow it. And that's not it's partially an indictment of the people that have tried to get in the business and have gotten the business over the last 10, 20 years. And a lot of it is an indictment of what the company and companies, all the promotions, have turned this fucking business into. So I love, this is the best WWE programming that we're going to see over the next couple months, however long the biography series and the rival series runs, just because they're showing us shit that was actually good and profitable and over. But I don't know if it's not detrimental to their current product for people to see this, because it's a glaring slap in the face reminder that the modern shit sucks. And like I said, it's not just talent's fault. It's not just the promotion's fault. Everybody's had a hand in this. Having said that, let's talk about the Goldberg biography, because I didn't know, a lot about his growing up and younger life football career. I knew he played football, obviously. That's, the Atlanta Falcons, and that was the connection, how he got into business. But, since Goldberg is one of those guys that made a massive impact but didn't have a very long career, so they were able to flesh this out with more childhood, more personal life, more of his wife and kids, more football stuff, because how can you go 2 hours on pretty much a 3-year wrestling career plus guest appearances recently? His mother was a concert violinist. That would be a trivia question nobody would get. And I thought from the open that they were going to make this a real tearjerker. And it was kind of a somber open, and they had the recurring theme of him sitting in the deserted, old, dilapidated movie theater watching his life unfold on the screen in front of him. Heyman, right at the open, it sounded like it was good. Heyman was going to be the voiceover guy. Who's that? Liev Schreiber? Liev Schreiber. I guess Liv would be his sister. That does the, really somber and opens.
Well, he's the best. He did all the HBO sports stuff for years. He was fantastic.
Well, he's got competition now. Paul Heyman, if he's not the Liev Schreiber, he's the Garrison Keillor of wrestling documentaries. You can tell he works on this stuff and exactly what to say and how to say it, put people over, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we saw the football highlights. It was weird seeing Goldberg with hair. And he made the statement numerous times on the program that he loved football and would have done that forever. He's a football player, but he had injuries. And he found wrestling through his accountant. I guess it worked out all right for him in the end, but I don't know if most accountants said you ought to be a professional wrestler. I would get a new accountant. And let's talk about the WCW power plant for a second, because they showed brief footage of that training program, and they talked about the fact that Goldberg was taken to the power plant, given the basic bit of training, and then put on the fast track and put on TV because they needed something, and they saw they had something. where do we start? The whole power plant thing. And I think that's the point of this program is you got a little bit more sympathy for the position that Goldberg was put in. It's not like that anybody who knew the wrestling business didn't know the position he was being put in, but a lot of the fans may have gotten a little more sympathy because the power plant was a shitty training program that produced nobody of any fucking quality whatsoever because they didn't teach them professional wrestling. It was that weird boot camp Marine drill instructor. We're going to run all of you off, even though you're already there. I can understand running people off, not smarting them up before they get in the business or before they get in a fucking training program or see if they've got what it takes the first couple of weeks, right?
Didn't they run off Batista?
Yeah. They ran off a lot of people because it was stupid, because it was like going to school to be a doctor and you spend all your time washing dishes. And it was because Jody Hamilton, I know he's passed on. I'm not going to say anything bad about him. He was a nice person to me. I never had any problems with him. He was a great talent. The Assassins were a legendary tag team. Jody was a great promo. But the reason why Jody was chosen to head the training program was because of just his contacts with all the local wrestlers in Georgia. He had, in the mid-'80s, he had started Deep South Wrestling when all the territories went under. And it ran a year or two, and it didn't really work. And this was not, I mean, it's not alone that independent wrestling promotions were going out of business at that time period, but Deep South was not a good one, nor was it ever successful, nor did they ever get any buzz for anything. It was just a local independent that he got barely TV, and it ran for a while. And then...
Wait, when did he show up in WCW again? Because he was in the booking committee meetings with you.
That's right. Then by 89, Turner Broadcasting buys WCW, and Jody comes in because, again, they're doing research on who is in Atlanta, who's involved in wrestling. Jody was very articulate and was able to sell himself. I have all this experience, and I've run my own promotion. They put him on the booking committee, the larger booking committee. When I was involved, and that's my firsthand testimony, Ric Flair was the booker. He used Kevin as his assistant. He put me on, basically do the paperwork and come up with some ideas every once in a while. The entire booking committee, because of Jim Herd, also included himself, because Herd had to be in those meetings where we didn't get anything done. Jim Barnett, because Barnett was the guy that Herd had hired to tell him everything he was doing was right. Jody Hamilton, because Jody was in the office, he was in charge of getting the rings to the buildings and booking job guys for TV and working with the ring crew and miscellaneous stuff like that. And also, did I mention Jim Ross was there because he was being forced to work in the office at that point. That was the enlarged booking committee, but none of those people were ever actually booked anything because Flair and Kevin and I did it in the car or in the locker room or in the hotel when we were away from Jim Herd. And actually, Jody, by that point, had sleep apnea. And he used to have a corner office in CNN Center in the WCW offices. But he kept falling asleep with the door open, and everybody could hear him snoring all through the office area. So they moved him out to a cubicle with no walls in the middle where they thought he wouldn't go to sleep. And so then later on, they moved Jody out of the office entirely and put him in charge of the power plant. And again, guy's a great veteran, but now it's 1989 and his wrestling career, except for when he worked for himself, had ended 10 years previously. And he's nearing 60. And so he finds Dwayne Bruce because he already knew Dwayne Bruce from doing jobs on TV. And I'm not knocking Dwayne Bruce either.
Now, a lot of fans don't know who Dwayne Bruce or Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker is or was.
Well, Dwayne Bruce was Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker, who became the head trainer at the power plant. You see him in this Goldberg documentary. He's the guy screaming at people while they're doing squats and they got the puke bucket out and everything. The reason why they called him Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker was because he and Dale Veazey, another local guy from Georgia, had started a tag team called the State Patrol, and they dressed up as Georgia State Patrol guys, right? And I don't remember what Dale's rank was, but Dwayne Bruce became Sergeant Buddy Lee Parker. So then Jody gives him the spot as head trainer at the power plant. Again, I'm not insulting Dwayne Bruce, but he was a job guy for WCW. Whenever he worked for WCW, he made appearances on local independent Georgia shows, and he was worked on top or whatever, but he had never, ever been in a position in any wrestling territory or company of any size or extent to where he was used in any way. But he browbeats and yells at and makes the trainees to power plant do millions of calisthenics. And the point is, the power plant was famous at that time inside the industry. And now that 20-something years has passed and everybody's seen who didn't come from there and who got run off from there, and that Goldberg was the only success story, and now they found out why. It was a joke. It was a joke training program. And every once in a while, if somebody like Terry Taylor got heat with the office, they'd send him over there because the power plant was in a different location than CNN Center downtown. And he'd try to kibitz with the guys, but it was not a coherent training program for wrestling. They taught guys like trained chimpanzees how to do moves and how to stay in condition. There was no mental teaching. There was no, this is the psychology of wrestling. This is the history of wrestling. This is the purpose of wrestling. This is everything we taught at OVW, anything that you learn in any quality training program, they didn't do there. That's why Mark Marrow, Johnny B. Bad, learned how to be Johnny B. Bad and be Johnny B. Bad in a match for 9 minutes. That's what they learned. And Bill DeMott carried that method of training that Jody liked when they started Deep South Wrestling again as a WWE developmental program in 2002-ish, 3-ish or whatever. And that thing burst into flames and fucking blew up on them. Because it was to the point where the WWE had to go down and get all of their equipment from the facility. They sent a truck overnight and were there first thing in the morning under cover of darkness to get the shit and pull out. And told Jody when they were grabbing the shit that they were closing the deal up. That's how bad they wanted to get away from that thing, because it was a fiasco. And there were stories that were not reported publicly that could have left them liable for other shit.
Dale Veazey was Lieutenant James Earl Wright.
That's right. Almost James Earl Ray. James Earl Wright. And that was, by the way, that was on Georgia TV in 1989. That showed you where some people's heads were at that point. But anyway, back to Goldberg on the biography. So that's why he didn't know what the fuck. He knew how to do power moves and growl and scream. That was his natural talent. They did nothing to bring anything else out. So, and when he had his base areas, first match on TV against Bill DeMott, it was all slams and spears and stuff like that. And then they put him on the road and gave him an undefeated streak. And when you listen to Goldberg, he's like, well, people had never seen a push like that before. What? And it's not his fault. This is what this guy still doesn't know about wrestling because it wasn't his life. He had never been a fan. Nobody ever taught him, and then they threw him out there. But no, there was a push like this hundreds of times in the history of wrestling. People just didn't see it on national television. But hundreds of times in the history of wrestling down through the years. I would expect Big Wayne Munn probably got a push like this. When wrestling promoters got an attraction of a giant or a physical freak or a star from another sport or athletic endeavor, a football player especially, because that lends itself because of the size and the badassery you have to be a football player. You take a guy in any territory, or in the old days before territories, just you take a guy and you know he's going to be a gimmick. He can't really wrestle. That's why they had policemen in the old days to protect the champion that wasn't really a wrestler against the double crosses that still happened. And you push him with quick, decisive victories over starting small and then working up the card to people of increasing stature. And he shows no weaknesses until he gets to the very top main event guys. And if it's a babyface, then the heel has to cheat or have an advantage. If he's a heel, then the babyface that he's up, main event babyface he's up against, finally has to find some kind of weakness. But that's the way. And then you move the guy on. Because if you've brought a gimmick in that can't work and that you're drawing specifically on their aura and their personality and how you're pushing them and smashing them over, you can't let him go any amount of time. It'll expose him, which they even said, Eric Bischoff, among others, said in the Goldberg bio, there comes a time they have to put time in. In the old days, once the gimmick had served its purpose, you moved it to another territory. So people didn't get tired of it and it'd still be over if it came back. But now there's no more territories. Now you can't just move a guy out. He has to stay there. And that was the same way 20 years ago. So now they're stuck with him. And of course, the political machinations behind Goldberg's booking and how they eventually killed the Golden Goose, which I think was Bobby Heenan's actual quote, that goes to show you that the promoter, in this case, was it Bischoff? The promoters were really TBS executives. They didn't know how to fucking keep this going. And Bischoff, of course, he's protecting Hogan because the Georgia Dome was addressed as Hogan called and had the idea to do the job for Goldberg purely in a benevolent manner, right? Did you get that? Remember, the real story was Hulk Hogan was not on the Georgia Dome card. Hulk Hogan was not announced. They knew they were going to have 40,000 people in the Georgia Dome, and Hogan was not figured in. And Hogan knew that the Turner Broadcasting bigwigs were going to be there in person to see that, and he needed to be in the main event. So, fuck the business. He's specifically wanting to impress Turner Broadcasting. So he inserts himself on the card in the main event and does the job for Goldberg in front of 40,000 people, not to get Goldberg over, but to put in the TBS executives' minds who didn't follow the day in and day out of the wrestling business and knew nothing really about anything else that was going on anywhere else. Well, there's Hulk Hogan, the guy we pay all this money to the point where every time we sell a Hogan t-shirt, we lose money. But he's got 40,000 people in the fucking Georgia Dome. So it's worth it. That was Hogan's mindset. Am I telling a lie, Brian Last?
That is the way I always heard it.
So, anyway, so now they've got Goldberg. He's been in the business for 1 year. He trained at the Power Plant, one of the worst McDonald's fast food wrestling schools of all time, for 3 months, and he's the world champion and undefeated. And, you know, in that respect, I've talked about maybe was Big Bubba Rogers the biggest 1 year prodigy ever. Less than a year, 9 months after he debuted on TBS television, he sold out Pittsburgh against Dusty and set an all-time record. And you got to think he was probably the best, biggest 1 year prodigy in the territories, but Goldberg has that beat.
And Goldberg's more than Nikita Koloff.
Yes. Nikita was a great 1 year prospect, but that was the year that Dusty was building the Carolinas and they didn't do the houses. He did the Great American Bash 85 with Flair. But traditionally, Nikita was a big draw for a short period of time, but I think Bubba beat him 2 years later. Anyway, they did a huge segment on the Hogan match. And as I said, you know, the push that the guy got was pure wrestling. It had been done 100,000 times. With Leviathan, when Batista got run off from the power plant, and showed up off of the Samoan school, that's when the WWF learned about him and sent him to OVW. And that's the same thing we did, because it was the same situation. Goldberg was 31 years old, had never watched a pro wrestling match, shows up at wrestling school, already has injuries from football, is a hell of a physical specimen, doesn't have any idea about what this business is or how to think about it. So what do? You take advantage of the strengths, you nullify the weaknesses, you smash him over, short, sweet. And it was the same thing with Batista, early 30s, injury prone, really didn't have any idea about the business, going to have a short window, let's do it. Of course, now, the short window that Goldberg had from 1997 to 2002 has opened up again a couple times a year over the last few years, but nobody saw that coming. So then, and they did talk about working the streak in this biography. And that's when it started taking some of the steam out of it too, because fans that were following it would realize there hadn't been as many days in the week for him to have that number of matches since last week when we saw the number. And Mike Tenay initially was responsible for recognizing the streak, and then they took it out of his hands and killed it by working it. And then the final political machination, Nash ends the streak on Goldberg's birthday. That was perfect. And of course, there was umpteen million kinds of outside interference. And finally, Hall uses a taser, but they used a gimmick taser, but Goldberg wanted him to use a real one, because at least he was smart enough to know then if Goldberg goes down, it has to look right. But it didn't, because they didn't. And that's pretty much, they don't say it on this show, but that's what not only killed the myth of Goldberg in WCW, but also started them on the downhill slide business-wise that led to the sale, year and a half later, not even?
I mean, it was the misbooking of Goldberg, Russo coming in, and the damage that television did to the fan base. I mean, there's a whole number of things that all happened within like a year and a half that, for everything good that happened to drive everything up, immediately brought everything back down to earth.
And now on Biography, they had an hour and 10 minutes to go into the show, and he'd already lost to Nash. And I'm thinking, how the fuck? There's not that much left of his career. But then he even mentioned it. You mentioned this also to me on the phone. This is probably the most honest recounting of a career and a person that we've gotten on any of these shows from Goldberg. He knew he didn't know what he was doing, and he admitted it. And he also acknowledged that they sent him out there unprepared. But he was honest about it. And that's the thing. After he did the job and the myth took the hit, they had been teaching him what to do as he went along on the job. So now he's not undefeated. He's not the champion anymore. And he's got no idea how to take care of himself or get over on his own, because all he's done is what they've told him to do. And now he's got a main event matches with top guys that have some length to them. And here comes poor Bret Hart. And boy, what do you think? They say two sides to every story, and it's never been more obvious on a wrestling documentary that is true, because everything that Goldberg said about Bret Hart and everything Bret Hart said about Goldberg were both true. Goldberg said he would have wanted Bret to teach him, that he looked up to Bret. It's Bret freaking Hart, right? Which I can believe that's true. And that he would never do anything intentionally to be reckless with a guy. And I believe that's true, but he didn't know what the fuck was going on. He'd never probably worked with a guy that was going to put as much into his match as Bret was. The guys that he'd been working with were probably just, let's get in and get out without Goldberg hurting me. But Bret was going to be, okay, I'm Bret Hart. I'm going to have a great match with anybody. And Bret conversely said Goldberg never learned how to wrestle and treated him like a practice dummy. And nobody in WCW had ever called Goldberg out on that. And I can believe that too. He never did learn how to wrestle. I can believe nobody in WCW say anything to him about it because he was the golden boy. I think he probably did treat Bret like a practice dummy, but not intentionally, but just because that's the way that he had been working and nobody shouted him down about it. So Goldberg had no idea the concept of, history of, and the point of the business. He was never a fan. He was never taught psychology except as something happened. And then he was at the mercy of the people that were trying to take his spot, the Nashes and Hogans and etc. And where Bret had said, I'll teach you and I'll help you if you don't hurt me, I don't think Goldberg obviously meant to hurt him or thought he was being rough. I think he was just doing shit he'd been doing and nobody'd ever bothered to fucking say anything about it. And it was very telling. I did not realize before the kick in that match that Bret did the figure 4 spot around the post and hit his head. And that makes even more sense because when Bret first came up with that spot, what he would do was he would have the referee out there on the floor trying to pry him off of the guy he was going to do the figure 4 to, so that when he did the figure 4 and jumped up, the referee was right behind him, and as a natural reaction, it looked like, would catch Bret and help put him down to the floor without him dropping on his head. And he didn't do that there. There was no referee. He told Goldberg, hold on to my foot. And you can see, as soon as Goldberg puts his hand on his foot, Bret, okay, and goes up, and Goldberg took it right off. Because I think he was like grabbing, like, do I have it? Or I don't know what. Because who's ever put Goldberg in a figure 4 around the ring post? Ever before that?
How many regular figure 4s had he ever been in before that?
Probably 0.
Yeah.
So Bret was expecting this guy to be able to do what had been called and what he'd been told to do, shit that he'd never done before, and on the spur of the moment, that quick. And it didn't happen, and Goldberg was trying, but goddamn. I mean, you say, this is the guy that his pre-match thing is to bust his own head open, really shoot headbutt into lockers. So you think he's going to be fucking easy to work with? So that's the thing. When you bring an outside gimmick into the business and give it a monster push, you have to be aware of the ways not to expose that push and not to imperil other people because of that push. So there, and then the kick came. And then when he punched the limousine window out and fucking nearly bled to death, because it was a real limousine window and he just decided to do that. He was giving everything he had. He was making himself a nervous fucking wreck. And then in this program, they talked about, well, we saw the writing on the wall with the AOL Time Warner merger. WCW is on borrowed time. There was no mention of the massive losses as a result of Bischoff and Shitstain and the rest of everybody's mismanagement and, thinking when they were on top of the world that they were all rock stars. And remember Shitstain's famous quote. So what do you do when business goes down? Well, if we book it right, business will never go down.
I didn't know that quote, really.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he actually said that one time. I said, you got all this shit going on and you're hot-shotting and all these, what happens when business goes down? What are you going to follow? Well, if we do it right, business will never go down. Because there's been all these examples of not only wrestling promotions, but any entertainment genre in the history of history where you never had a lull in business. So anyway, there were no mention of the massive losses. It was all attributed to the AOL Time Warner merger. Vince buys WCW, and Goldberg sits home for 2 years because that was one of the reasons why WCW went out of business, because these top guys had contracts that were guaranteed through Turner, not WCW. The guys that Vince picked up after the sale of WCW to the WWE were all the guys that were on regular wrestling contracts, and those ended, and they either went to the WWE or they went somewhere else, but they needed a job. But the Goldbergs, and who else was it? Was it Nash and Hogan and
Flair? Even Flair. Flair was out for what, a year?
And somebody, Dallas Page is the only one. Page had one.
Page and Booker T, I think, took the buyout.
Page and Booker T took the buyout because they wanted to wrestle. And the other guys said, because those contracts were made through Turner Home Entertainment and weren't on WCW's books, and they had to be paid even when WCW was out of business and owned by someone else, and they didn't have anything to do with it. They still paid millions of dollars to those guys to sit at home and do nothing. That was the hidden bookkeeping that they started to find out about when WCW lost $60 million in, 1 year, the last year they were in business, and these payments were going to these other wrestlers, and the naysayers and people who hadn't wanted wrestling in the Turner Empire to begin with finally had a way out. They couldn't sell it for the 2 years it was selling out everything in sight, but once that everything went down and all these people were getting paid all this money and everything, they said, fuck it, let's get rid of it. And it took them 2 years to get all the wrestlers off their books. So anyway, and Goldberg, he didn't fit in the locker room in the WWE with the other boys, because then it was more of an example of a gimmick going into a regular locker room. All those guys had been in the business. They'd trained. They'd paid their dues.
Well, that wasn't it. I mean, there was a lot of resentment because of the money he was getting, which he deserved. That's
where I'm going. They've trained, they've paid their dues, they've been wherever the fuck for however long, and they're making X dollars, and here comes Goldberg that had everything handed to him. Not saying he's a horrible person, and he didn't beg for people to hand him everything, but they did. They handed him the push, they handed him the belt, they handed him the big money. Now he's been sitting at home for 2 years getting big money from Turner to do nothing, and now he comes into our locker room and they're going to push him again. So those guys didn't like him, and he didn't fit in because he wasn't one of the boys. He'd never intended to be. So he stayed a year and left because they didn't get Goldberg, and Goldberg didn't like them. And remember, they tried to make Goldberg one of the boys. They didn't understand either. And they had him doing goofy shit to try to bring his personality out. Just saying they would, Bruce, when I first found Rhino, I said, sign this fuck. He's 19 years old. Well, he has no personality. He's fucking 19. He'll get one. But with Goldberg, this was his personality. Hit the ring, snort, scream, spear somebody, jackhammer, hand up, leave. They couldn't figure that out. They had him wearing a blonde gold dust wig or something. So he leaves, and the WrestleMania 20 match with Brock was the perfect thing to leave on to never come back to the wrestling business, because they booed him out of the building because they knew that both the guys that they were leaving. And honestly, if they'd have known the real story, they would have probably cheered Goldberg and booed Brock, because Brock really did dislike the wrestling business and didn't want to be a part of it, no matter where it was or who it was. Whereas Goldberg just didn't like the WWF and wanted to move on. He liked the fans, still likes the fans. So, but anyway, they booed them both out of the building, and he went home, got married, had kids, a big personal life segment because there's not a lot of career left. And he was away for 12 years, 13 years, whatever it was. And finally just wanted to come back so his son could see him wrestle, because he never had. And
they didn't really touch on the fact, and I think it's important, that despite all things considered being a star for a brief period of time, and despite being gone for so many years, the fans never forgot about him. The fans never stopped chanting his name when Ryback was starting to get a push. Remember, the fans were chanting Goldberg at him because they saw him as a rip-off Goldberg. There have been stories that Tony Khan may have been interested in Goldberg in the early days of AEW. There's a reason for that.
There have been rumors of that, but they were quickly shot down by an NDA.
But the point is, he was someone that, despite not being around, never went away.
Well, you can understand Tony being a fan of Goldberg, if indeed he might be, because he's a fan of all late 90s wrestling television. But with the fans, again, it was a perfect push. It was different. It was unusual for what they were seeing at the time. And Goldberg was the perfect person to do it. If they'd tried to do the same winning streak, quick victories with Almost, nobody would give a shit because he's the shits. If they'd given the Undertaker gimmick to somebody else besides Mark Calloway, we wouldn't be talking about it now because it'd been the shits. It's the right person with the right push at the right time with the right exposure, and that's what Goldberg had, and that's why the people didn't forget it. And honestly, the nostalgia factor helped in that people remembered what they wanted to remember. They wanted to remember the push. They wanted to remember the streak. They wanted to remember the jackhammer and the breathing the fire and the smashing the limo or whatever. They didn't want to remember Goldberg getting beat with a taser. They didn't want to remember Goldberg wearing a blonde wig. So him going away and being gone, they remembered the good shit because that's what they liked. And they forgot about the bad shit. And then when he comes back 15 years later and he looks close enough to because I mean, we all change, but my God, where do you see? And we see what he goes through to stay in that condition. He's had multiple injuries. He's got painful body parts, but he still looks enough like Goldberg. And now the wrestling business has changed to where even the main event guys don't have to go out and actually have a match and know how to do things. Because the people have now come to, from all the sloppiness and the amateur bullshit, now they've come to accept when top guys get in the ring and just 3 spears and 4 choke slams, big move match, and it's over with, and they think that's good and they accept it. So his matches now that he's 20 years older get over better with all of the modern fans than they did when he tried to wrestle guys like Bret Hart and couldn't because he didn't know how to do a headlock takeover. He could do a hell of a jackhammer on a 500-pound man, but hip toss, oh shit, what's that? So he's more valuable, and also because of the dearth of names and money-drawing talent now, and that all the legends have to be brought back, I would say that Goldberg is more important now to the box office and to the pay-per-view or to the program in general when he comes back for the WWE over the last few years, maybe even than he was on the first run, because yeah, he got over, but you still had Hulk Hogan, you still had Nash and Hall and the NWO, you had Sting, you had Flair, you had all those the whole roster was filled with Hall of Famers up and down the card. So, and it looks like he's kind of figured out more about the business now. At least he knows that he didn't know a lot of shit to begin with. And
well, he's with Heyman. And honestly, there's a reason why Heyman was in this thing, and Heyman is so smart. And that match they showed the clips of, one of my favorite matches that went like less than 5 minutes ever. Him and Brock when he came back, and he surprised everyone by beating him. It was so perfectly put together, even though it was short. To me, it's one of the most brilliant matches I've ever seen, and to me, it reeks of Paul Heyman in a good way. Not reek sounds like bad. It reeks of Paul Heyman in a good way.
It's dripping with Heyman. Yeah, like with Roman Reigns, with Brock Lesnar, with Goldberg, power, and Roman can do more, and he does, but short matches, power matches, the big moves, couple surprises, get the fuck out. That's Heyman's deal for those guys, and it works. And I just wonder if they realize that A&E played Brock Lesnar getting squashed like a fucking pimple 2 weeks before SummerSlam by a guy that's not on the show. But anyway, so then he came back and he squashed Brock and he got in the Hall of Fame and he's finally learned to appreciate wrestling in the end. But that was the Goldberg. But he's genuinely happy to be remembered. He loves his son. He likes the fans. I don't have any animosity toward Goldberg like I would for some asshole who'd been pushed to the moon and didn't appreciate it, a la the Ultimate Warrior. Because you never heard the Ultimate Warrior say, actually, I was the shits and had no idea what I was doing, but all these guys put me over and it was a bad spot for me to be in. And let's face it, Goldberg was better than the Warrior ever got to be. But at least this guy, he knows what they did to him now, and he knows what happened, and it seems like it's all good in the end for him. And, you know, we've learned a few things about he was teased and tormented for being Jewish when he was a kid. Tell me this, Brian Last. I am an expert in verbal combat, and I don't know how to make fun of somebody for being Jewish. What am I going to tell you? You got some really weird holidays.
Well, you're not ignorant. That's one of the reasons you're not good at making fun of Jewish people for no good reason.
I wouldn't know where to start.
This was, I thought, really great. Let's go with what you just brought up. Nice to have a world champion who was bar mitzvahed. I'm happy about that. But I thought this opened up.
We've had a few world champions that were bar roomed.
That's exactly right. I thought it was really nice to see Goldberg in this light. It was really insightful to hear his thoughts throughout the process. And I thought we've seen a lot of outsiders come into wrestling and not be like Goldberg was here. I mean, I was blown away by just how much, I really didn't understand the business. And he was very forthright with a lot of the things you would expect a person being profiled to hide or not want to necessarily talk about or be as open about. The Bret Hart thing was weird for me because I love Bret Hart. He's my favorite. And I like Goldberg. You know, when I used to advocate for people for the Hall of Fame, he was one of the names I always picked for various reasons. And you watch that and it's like you said, you see both sides. And I feel awful for Bret because I love Bret and I wish we got more Bret. The industry would be better if Bret had 5 more years or whatever. And the figure 4 thing, after he was saying it and you actually watch his face when he hits the ground, you understand where he's coming from. And when you see the slow-mo of that kick, it's fucking brutal.
He got it from the back and the front within a 10-minute period. And that,
and
boom, that was it.
And Goldberg didn't know what he was doing, and he all but said that. And I don't think for one second he intentionally hurt Bret Hart. That's not to say he didn't hurt Bret Hart, and he shouldn't apologize for hurting Bret Hart.
And I believe, as Bret said, cost me $3 million a year for 4 years or whatever the fuck it was.
And of all the people in the world that Bret has been really mad at and forgiven, I mean, come on. You forgave Shawn Michaels and Vince. You're not going to forgive Goldberg? I don't think he did it intentionally, and you can tell it's something that bothers him. And he's a very honest and open guy from what we saw here. The fact that they addressed it in this and they had Bret's side of it too tells you how much it bothered Goldberg that this story's out there, that Bret still talks about this. And again, I understand Bret's side also.
And Bret making up with Shawn and Vince, he knew them for years. He had a long relationship, positive and negative. I can see that happening. I can see him just a cursory glance at Goldberg, muscle guy, football player, outsider. I'll try to do what I can. And then he fucking gives him brain damage.
And he has no hope, too, because think about Goldberg before Bret got there, or after Bret got there even. Goldberg wasn't, and I'm not even saying this would have been the answer in 1997 or 98, Goldberg wasn't sitting in the locker room talking with Flair and Piper about things that worked in the past. He was embraced by other top guys, whether they were going to use him to help themselves or whether they just didn't know how to tell a top guy proper advice. But Hogan and Hall and Nash, and I'm not saying they're all the same person. Everyone has their own objectives. But I don't think Goldberg, from the moment he got there, really had that person that could sit him down and explain. If he had Heyman then, everything would have been different.
Oh, my God. Well, he would have known how to refund Turner Broadcasting's plane tickets, I'll tell you that. But no, somebody like Heyman would have helped him immensely early in his career being the brain in the corner. to when he got lost or if he needed help or just critiquing afterwards or whatever the case. That would have helped immensely, but, you know, we are where we are. But seems like a nice guy. I've never met Goldberg, never seen him in person 1 second in my life.
He seems like an incredibly nice guy. Seems like a very honest guy. By the way, seems like he had a great family. I was very impressed with his wife. And I like his reason for coming back to wrestling. He wanted his son to see this once. That's pretty cool.
And boy, when his son was in the ring, his son's face was like, "Oh shit, get me out of here, Pop."
Yeah, I don't know about I don't know why his son ripped his shirt off. That hasn't been explained exactly.
he lost it. He went crazy. But anyway, I'm looking. Except now we have a 1 week hiatus on the biography. Oh, my drywall must be dry.
Is that what we hear? Is that the banging we hear?
That's where my drywallers are back at it.
Wow, it sounds so dry. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. That's because it's drier than a nun's twat, I'll tell you.
Oh.
But anyway, we're going to take a brief hiatus from the biography series because next week, 2-hour biography on the Bella twins.
Oh, come on. You got to watch it. No. Please. Please. Got to review that one. That's one people want to hear you review. What the hell could they say? What the hell are they going to say in that thing?
That's what I'm saying. Okay, we're doing a documentary series on the history of aviation. So next week, we're going to have 2 women from Cleveland that flew a Delta flight one time to Des Moines for a wedding. What the fuck?
Will John Laurinaitis be in the documentary?
I hope he makes the final cut. And then maybe they can do an update. And the divorce hearings have been scheduled for... But yeah, next week, a biography on the Bella twins.
You got it. Come on. It's so much... It'll be good. It'll be good because you'll lose your mind, but not in a way that'll make you mad.
No, it'll make me mad.
You think it'll make you mad?
Because I like these shows, and I'm thinking there are so many great wrestlers down through history that they could choose as a topic for the precious little time that they have. What is this, a 6-episode season? Last year was 6 or 8 or whatever, and they're using up one on the Bella twin. It can't even be a top female wrestler, someone that, you know, we might want to. Trish Stratus was a big deal at one point in time.
Yeah, but then they'd have to show clips of what McMahon did to her on TV.
Oh, well, I don't. How about Sherry Martel? She deserves a little goddamn recognition.
Absolutely, and WWE would probably want to avoid the end of her life, and that may prevent them from focusing on Sherry Martel. The Bellas are there, and they're retired. And I think the show is based around retired people. And
retired from what?
From being Bellas on WWE TV. They're still Bellas, I guess, in other programs. But
I've seen them. They were on Ridiculousness one time, and they brought them out WWE wrestlers. I'm like, what the? How loose has this definition gotten now?
Please watch it. Please. I want to see them in training. What the hell are they going to talk about? Where did they train? Was it OVW or was it?
Oh, don't you ever blame that on me.
After you.
I don't remember ever hearing them in conjunction with OVW. And even if I was gone, and even if Danny was closed up in his office trying to ignore everybody, between Rip Rogers and a few other people, they would have learned something.
No, they're at a Florida Championship Wrestling.
Now, there you go. So I can't take any responsibility, nor can the city of Louisville. I mean, that was at a time when Laurinaitis, interestingly enough, ending up their father-in-law, was looking through lingerie catalogs and calling models agents and signing them to developmental contracts. And people think I'm making that up, and no, I'm not. We've said this before. It was the God's honest truth. He sent us a couple in OVW, and one of the girls had a fainting spell after running the ropes. And everybody was laughing at him. And everybody thought he was a fucking idiot. And that was before he signed the wrong one-legged wrestler. There was only 2. He managed to get the wrong one. And that was obviously before anything that he's paid money to cover up that I'm not going to go into. But so we got the Bella twins, two girls who wanted to start a makeup company and figured we'll be stars on wrestling television to do it. And they're going to do 2 hours on A&E on them.
Is it 2 hours?
They're 2-hour programs. Maybe they'll show half an hour of Mighty Mouse reruns in the middle just to pad it out a little bit.
Maybe we'll get to see some of the home life. Bryan Danielson at home. The other one used to date John Cena. And now she's, I think, married to some civilian.
Who was it that told one of them wrestling ability is not sexually transmitted?
Who had that line? That was a good one.
It is very good.
Well, you know what? I forgot about this. Will they address in the documentary what John Cena proposed to her at WrestleMania? And then that never happened.
What did he propose anyway?
Marriage.
Oh. I thought he's done an interview saying they split up because he just didn't want to get married.
He literally proposed to her in the ring at WrestleMania.
That's one of them I didn't watch.
All right. Well, we'll see if you watched the Bella documentary. And of course, if you really have so much of a problem with the Bellas in this documentary, it may not be good enough for you to not watch your TV or
I got to go somewhere.
Leave the room. You may have to get out of the house. That's right.
I may have to leave town. Should I start booking my trip now? Let's see, Sunday night, 8 o'clock Eastern. I need to be at least 150 miles away. You know what I need to do, Brian? I need to have Black Beauty checked out, make sure the maintenance has been done, make sure everything's humming, because I may have to hit the highway, roll on down the highway, get on the interstate and keep on going to get as far away from television as possible to avoid the documentary on the Bella twins. But now I'm just thinking, it's been a while, Brian, as you know, since I've driven any long distance, and I haven't done all of the maintenance and the fix-ups on Black Beauty, and I may need to do that. I'm going to have to look at the Conglergal Illustrator. You know, the Conglergal Illustrator is the thing that makes your GPS run. And they've got one of those at rockauto.com if you need one. I'm going to have to sort through everything and make sure that my car is in the peak of condition to get me away from these bad television programs. And if you want to do the same, folks, all you got to do is log on, as they say, to rockauto.com. They've got all the parts for your car or truck, motorcycle, bicycle, unicycle, tank, amphibious vehicle, or other motorized conveyance. It's amazing. No brick and mortar store here with just a few items. No, as we've mentioned, they have an entire clear plexiglass building. Also, there's a little bit of Elmer's glue in there, but no brick and no mortar. And it's on a South Sea island in the Pacific. It's over 800,000 square feet. That's why they've got one of every auto part that has ever been manufactured in the history of the world available to the person who needs it. Of course, if two of you need the same thing, there could be a fight. However, millions and millions of parts. It doesn't matter what you need. You go to rockauto.com. They've got it. They've got it cheaper than all these chain outlets. They will deliver it to your door. As a matter of fact, you just order one of those parts next day or two. Guy knocks on your door. He's got the cute little rockauto.com cap on, cute little rockauto.com logo on his shirt. They wear shorts like the UPS guys. I don't know. They don't have sexy legs. Some of them need to shave. But nevertheless, that cute little delivery man is right there handing you your Framistat or your Squidgen or your Bumfuck, anything you need for your car.
Your Bumfuck?
Your Bumfuck. See, that's a thing that goes onto your bum to keep it from getting fucked up. Your Bumfuck. I don't know. I've named all the auto parts.
No, you don't.
I've named all the auto parts that I know what the fucking name of them are. The Thing Jing, the Framistat, and the Focalube. Nevertheless, if you need a part, get it at rockauto.com. And when you go there and buy if you're planning on buying a car in the future, get some extra parts for it just in case. You'll have them on hand. You know these things don't last like they used to. And if you write JCE in their How Did You Hear About Us box, they will know we sent you. They will not give you any kind of discount because they're already cheap, but at least they'll know that you have good friends. All the parts your car will ever need with amazing selection and reliably low prices. That's the folks at rockauto.com.